Intellectuals in Society. Ideological differences based on beliefs about facts, causation, human nature, and the character and distribution of knowledge are ultimately questions about different perceptions of the real world, leading to hypotheses which can be tested empirically. Close quote. Now, everybody who's been to college and high school knows that what you've just described is the intellectual method. You come up with a hypothesis and you test it against reality. And yet you argue here that the least interested in actual empirical tests, testing ideas against reality, are intellectuals. Why?
Because there are many talents. They have a huge ego stake in a given set of conclusions. So in other words, it's very asymmetrical. I mean, if you believe in free markets and, traditional values and so forth, there is no exaltation that comes with that. You're just somebody who believes in free markets and traditional values.
On the contrary, there's a certain humility that comes with it. You
Yes.
say, look, the market knows more than I do.
Yes.
The traditional moral wisdom of the ages knows more than I do. You humble yourself before the wider world, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But if you believe in social justice and saving the environment, you're really something. And so the people with that viewpoint have a huge ego stake. And empirical evidence is like gambling all of that on a roll of the dice.
Okay. They don't want to test for fear that they might be proven wrong.
Yes.
They don't want to know the answer. Again, intellectuals in society, quote, intellectuals on issues ranging across the spectrum from housing policies to laws governing organ transplants have sought to have decision-making discretion taken from those directly involved who have personal knowledge and a personal stake and transferred to third parties who have neither and who pay no price for being wrong, close quote. So again, this counter common sense, you know what's best for your health, therefore we must make the decision in a bureaucracy in Washington.
That's right.
Well,
if you've been told all your life, and many of these people have, from an early age, they were in the class for bright, gifted children. They were the ones who got into the good high schools. They were the ones who were accepted in colleges that accept less than 10% of the applicants. They've heard this all through their lives. And after a while, they must, in all due modesty, believe it.
All right. The percentage of cabinet appointments with experience in the private sector. The administration of Dwight Eisenhower, almost 60%. George W. Bush, over 50%. Barack Obama, barely 20%.
Yes.
What are we to make of this?
That there is a reason why things have declined the way they have. That people of that sort have a track record. I remember years ago encountering a fellow who had been a teaching fellow at Harvard when I was an undergraduate. And I said to him, I've been noticing that whenever there's a great disaster, there always seems to be a Harvard man in the middle of it. He said, have you noticed that too? Think of McNamara and the Whiz Kids and the Vietnam War. Think of the Ford Foundation. Who was the Harvard man in charge of that? I think it was Bundy.
Sounds right.
Yeah, and he launched this whole notion of subsidizing community activists as the answer to the racial problems. Of course, community activists have every incentive to exacerbate the problem to the fullest. I mean, calm would be the end of their job.
So why, I'm just still trying to get at this contrast between the growing role of intellectuals in American life, which has taken place not only in our lifetime, but in the lifetime of somebody who's in college this very day. You can see it expanding over the last quarter of a century or so. Why should that be taking place now? Why should intellectuals have a growing role, and why should the nature of intellectuals have changed? If you look at the founders, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, quite different characters and temperaments. These were both extremely well read. John Adams was a Harvard man. And yet you don't get what you get, I would argue, and I think you'd agree, but I put it to you, you get the sense over and over again, particularly in Adams. You get it in Washington. You certainly get it in the constitutional debates. It's the tragic vision of life.
Oh, no question.
Power is dangerous. We need to hem this in. We need to devolve as much power as we can to ordinary people. Now, why is it that the founder should have grasped that, and intellectuals today just don't see it at all?
Well, first of all, these people did not make their living as intellectuals. They did not make their living even as politicians, most of them.
Right.
Most of them had day jobs. And when the rebellion against Britain started, they put that aside for the time being to go into politics and to try to write up a constitution and all those kinds of things. But they were not intellectuals in the sense in which I define it, as people who earn their living by producing a final product which is simply ideas.
Right. Segment 3, intellectuals condescending. Intellectuals in society, quote, intellectuals give people who have the handicap of poverty the further handicap of a sense of victimhood.
Yes.
Close quote. Explain that, Tom.
Intellectuals have a great tendency to see poverty as a great moral problem to which they have the solution. Now, the human race began in poverty, so there's no mysterious explanation as to why some people are poor. The question is, why have some people gotten prosperous? And in particular, why have some gotten prosperous to a greater degree than others? But everybody started poor. So poverty is not a mystery to be solved by intellectuals. More than that, I think one of the things I wish I'd put more emphasis on in the book is that intellectuals have no interest in what creates wealth and what inhibits the creation of wealth. They are very concerned about the distribution of it, but they act as if wealth just exists somehow. And it's only a question, it's like manna from heaven. It's only a question of how we split it up.
And why should that be? Why shouldn't they find that question at least intellectually fascinating?
Because it would destroy the whole vision that they have.
Because it would lead to the answer of free markets.
Well, it would say there are enormous numbers of reasons why people acquire the ability to create wealth, and they vary all over the world. And so if you find, for example, that in centuries past, Germans living in Eastern Europe had much higher standards of living than the indigenous peoples of Eastern Europe, intellectuals will say, well, the Germans have somehow oppressed the people of Eastern Europe.
Right.
Or the ones who are into genetic determinism will say the Germans were born biologically superior to the people of Eastern Europe. But anyone with a knowledge of history would know that there are all kinds of reasons why Western Europe as a whole has far greater wealth producing capacity than Eastern Europe. But of course, that would then cut out the role of intellectuals.